Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, down there in Miami, Florida, where it looked like a little bit cold because the Tennessee Volunteers rolled into your hometown, your area of expertise, Wes, and dismantled the Clemson Tigers in the orangest of Orange Bowls. Were you in attendance? Were you tailgating before? How is the Tennessee takeover in Miami right now, Wes?
Can't say that I was tailgating on the property, but definitely tailgating in spirit wherever it was that I was.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of drinking over the holiday weekend. So I was tailgating in spirit for sure.
I like it. Did you see a lot of Tennessee folks? Did you go out and about and see more Clemson folks? How was it?
I actually went up to Savannah, Georgia for those few days. So I wasn't even in Miami for that time. I went up to Savannah to visit my brother and his wife. Me and my wife went up there. And so we spent that weekend over there. So can't say I saw anything here.
I like it. You know what's weird is I'm from Georgia. I lived there up until a few years ago, and never been to Savannah. It's always been on the bucket list. I've never gone down. I've never done it. The wife and I were talking about it a couple weeks ago, actually. But yeah, Savannah seems pretty nice. Do you like it? Does your brother like it?
My wife and I have actually been there twice in the last 2.5 years. For whatever reason, we just ended up saying, you know what, let's just do New Year's Eve up there. We really enjoy it. Super haunted, definitely haunted. But what I like about it is that it's not like Disney World. It's not like, hey, look at this spooky thing over here and this haunted thing over there. It's just like, it's very matter of fact. It's like, yeah, that's haunted. But you have to, like, they'll only tell you if you ask. And it's just sort of a matter of fact, understood thing. But for the most part, cool college town. SCAD's right there around the corner. Good bars. Shout out to Abe's on Lincoln. Great bar there. And it's just a good down to earth, good time.
I like it. Have you been to a Savannah Bananas game yet?
No, that's still on the list for sure.
That's on the list, man. I got to see that. I showed my wife a video of like what the games are like because she's not a big sports person, and that's like one of those where I was like, look, it's not really a sporting event. Like if you go to me with that one, it's more up your alley.
Yeah, it's like a Las Vegas show.
Yes, exactly. Wes.
Yeah.
The Miami Heat are playing slightly better basketball. They're maybe turning the corner. Maybe people wrote the RIP a little bit too quickly when it came to the Miami Heat, where we've seen this before. What's flipped as of late with Miami?
So they've won 8 of their last 11 games. I think the biggest thing here is just the health of the team. They've had their preferred starting lineup for just 13 games all season. They've had so many injuries to their key players that they've had a really hard time finding a rhythm. And this is a team that, yeah, you look at it, there's a lot of chemistry in terms of the guys in that locker room. They really haven't turned over the locker room all that much. But in terms of roles, a lot of things changed going into this year. Bam Adebayo having to take a step up. Tyler Hero incorporated into the starting lineup, trying to make Victor Oladipo a full-time sort of sixth man, and a bunch of other things. So there was a lot of other things that they needed to figure out. And given that the starting lineup had so little time together, they just had a hard time figuring that stuff out through the first quarter or so of the season. So they're finally healthy. They're winning games. And I do think that there's a vibe with that team that they were like, hey, like once we get our guys, and look, every team's going to say that, but the drop off between Miami's best players and like that kind of plucky undrafted group is a big gap. And so once they got their guys and they were able to figure things out, there's a sense among the guys in that locker room, like, hey, we're sort of a sleeping giant. We're going to be able to go on a run. We're really confident that we're a legit competitive playoff team. And so they're starting to turn that corner a little bit. There's still some things that I have, my concerns with, like the aforementioned undrafted guys, Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, like that kind of group. Can they finally start making some 3-point shots? Because if they don't, then I think there's a pretty hard ceiling on this team, as good as Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo have been. But overall, I think like the best days of this season are ahead of the Miami Heat, not behind them.
Have they been missing, like in terms of Strus and Duncan? Have they been good looks? Have they been just a lot of tough looks? Have teams defended them differently this year than they have in years past? Why haven't they been falling for them?
I can't answer that. I have no idea. The looks have been good, man. Like they've been the looks that they always get. I mean, that Bam Adebayo, Duncan Robinson dribble handoff thing that took them all the way to the finals in the bubble,
Mm.
like that's still there every single night. And it's hard to defend movement shooters. The problem is that, like the movement shooters just haven't been making those movement shots, but they're
Mm.
there, And so with Bam and Tyler Heroes too, like they're starting to attract so much more attention. So even if even if opponents are sort of wise to the fact that Duncan Robinson and Max Strus are good shooters now because they've been on the scouting report for a couple of years, Tyler Hero is demanding double teams, like 30 feet out. Bam Adebayo is demanding double teams once he kind of crosses that free throw line extended, and that's starting to create new looks, but still open looks for Strus and Duncan Robinson and Gabe Vincent and Caleb Martin. All these guys shot like over 36% last year. Among that group, only Caleb Martin is still shooting above that rate. Everybody else is below 36%, and that's not a good mark for them.
How much of this is Tyler Hero's fault for becoming a really good player?
All of it. It's all on Tyler Hero. We can all play. It's actually been really remarkable to see him sort of flourish in that starting job. I know there's a lot of people out there that thought he was sort of just a sixth man stat stuffer guy, and kind of, even though he was almost unanimous the sixth man of the year, sort of like kind of turned their nose up at it. Like, we didn't really want to vote for you, but there's nobody else that was good enough. Like, we're not really into points anymore. And I just kind of kept reminding people, like, points are still the most important part in basketball. I know that we're all super smart about basketball now, and we love two-way players and defense and that kind of stuff. And I love that stuff as much as the next guy. But points at the end of the day, like scoring more than those than your opponent, is still the most important part of basketball. It's the whole point. And when you got a guy averaging 20 plus off the bench, that's a really good mark. But to do that now, to basically maintain those numbers and then increase the efficiency this year as a starter, going up against starters the entire time, or for the most part, certainly more often, that's been pretty remarkable. And then the eye test bears it out. He's a better playmaker. He's better at just sort of picking his spots in the game. It doesn't feel like, hey, microwave score, go out there and just get us a bunch of buckets. He's doing it within the flow of the game. His floor game has improved. And that's why I kind of am still a little bullish on the Heat, depending on what your expectations are. Because if everybody can kind of catch up to Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, then I actually think this team could be quite good. I don't think that they're a championship contender. I don't think they're within that inner circle, but I think they could be still much better than what their record shows right now.
Which lineups are working the best right now?
The starting lineup. They're in those 13 games, they're like 8.3, outscoring opponents by 8.3 points per 100 possessions. I think I got that number right off the top of my head. That's a really good group. That's a really good ranking. Their bench, which was one of the top 5 benches in the league last year, by most markers, is bottom 5 in almost every marker this year. That's the problem, is that it's just the caboose isn't up to the head of the train. I know the caboose is the back of the train. I'm not really sure the head of the train is. It might just be called the head of the train. I don't know.
That's
The
a good
captain
question.
train.
As a guy who spent the first like 4 or 5 years of his birthdays on trains, and my great grandfather worked on the Atlanta Railroad, I should know this. Big train guy, and I don't know what you call the front of the train. Apologies.
What's the front of a boat called? Like the bow? That doesn't. So that doesn't make sense.
A train called. It is. The front of a train is called a locomotive.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, the caboose has got to catch up to the locomotive.
Yeah. There you go.
There it is. Extended metaphor. We got it. We worked on it.
That's good stuff. And now we know. We always want to learn stuff on this podcast, Wes. That's the main name of the game here. Is there any trades that make sense in the next month? It's interesting because I feel like what we talked about last time on this program, we were talking about the Heat, Wes. Kyle Lowry is just the forgotten player. Like, we've gone 9 minutes and have not mentioned Kyle Lowry once, and he was the big addition months and months ago, and it still just like comes down to Bam and Jimmy and the dribble handoff, Tyler Hero's development, and then the bench falling off. None of this has to do with Kyle Lowry. Like, has he just been like a bystander to what's happening, positive or negative? Like, what's going on with Kyle Lowry and his fit with this group? Do you see him being with this team past the deadline? Like, what's happening with Chloe?
He's been sort of the scapegoat for Heat fans down here. Look, and the Heat fans I don't know that they watched him in Toronto. They're like, why isn't he scoring more? It's like, because he never did. Like, that's not it. He's a guy that averaged 18 to 20 points per game. He's not averaging nearly that. He could do more scoring for sure. But he is a little bit of a, you use the word bystander, and that's a really good representation of what it looks like when he's on the court.
Mm.
All that Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo stuff that we're talking about, it is a little bit like blame Tyler here, because I don't know that the Heat were unprepared for the leaps that Bam and Tyler have made this year. And that two-man game, there's a budding chemistry that's happening with them that has sort of become their initial trigger in a lot of their offense, especially with Jimmy missing so many games. They've had to find just a staple in their offense that wasn't Jimmy Butler getting into the low block and then either spraying or scoring from there. And so they've leaned really far into this Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo pick and roll stuff, and it's been working. It's it's the 8th most productive pick and roll partnership in the NBA. So it's been good for them. The sort of unintended consequence of that is, what do you do with Kyle Lowry? Because he is still a guy who is unselfish, but needs to at least initiate and have the ball in his hands to initiate. Off the ball, he can work, but the catch and shoot numbers have just not been where they need to be. And so if he can be blamed for anything, it's that the shot hasn't gone in. A lot of it just looks flat. He doesn't really have his legs under him, but he's also 35, 36 years old. Like, that's just sort of what happens to smaller point guards. And so I don't know that you can blame him. He's actually, to me, he looks like he's in great shape. I just think it's like maybe an age thing or a rhythm thing. I can't really speak to what it is, but you mentioned the trade deadline, and look, I love Kyle Lowry. I love that he's on this Heat team and I get to watch him and be in the locker room with him. I have no issues with Kyle Lowry. But if this is going to be what Kyle Lowry is for this team, then he kind of becomes sort of, it's just like you're getting diminished returns on still who I think is a good player, like a top 80-ish player in the NBA. Do you consider trading him and say, you know what, we don't really need that traditional point guard. We could do the Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler with those 3 guys. We have enough unselfish playmaking kind of guys to sort of manufacture offense in that way. Do we look to maybe address other needs, whether it's on the wing, backup 3-point or backup scoring, address the bench, maybe get a front, more size in the front court, more athleticism? Like, all these things are real needs for this team. And if Lowry is just not going to be what you needed him to be when you acquired him going into last season, what he was for you for certain stretches of last season, if he's just not going to be that and you don't need him anymore, maybe you do look to move him. The problem is that he's like best friends with Jimmy Butler. He's like the godfather of Jimmy Butler's kids. Jimmy Butler is the star on this team. You need his buy-in. But if you're able to convince Jimmy, like, hey, this is going to better our chances to go ahead and win a championship, I have a hard time seeing Jimmy Butler saying no to that anyway. They became best friends when they never played with each other. It's not like these guys can't still hang out and talk. So, yeah, I think Lowry's an interesting name. I still think that ultimately a big shakeup trade like that, more likely to happen in the offseason. But I also wouldn't rule it out with this front office. So who knows? Like, this window is closing. They know that.
Best game they've played of late. Like, when this is the last game that I'm curious about. So the best game that you've seen them play, and then you're like, okay, this is the best version of what this team can be, and they showed it in this particular game. What was it for you?
It wasn't even a full game, man. It was the first half of the win over the Clippers. They took a 21-point lead in the second quarter. They ended up giving the entire lead back in the third quarter, and then kind of eked out the win at the end of the fourth quarter there. But that first half of basketball that the Heat played against the Clippers, they had not looked as good offensively or defensively. They had their starting lineup. That was the 13th game that they had them. They had Victor Oladipo, who's been back from the bench. Another reason for optimism since Victor Oladipo got back at the beginning of December. They went from a bottom 5 bench to about average, and which is a really good improvement there. And Oladipo looked great offensively. He had burst defensively. He was all up into everybody's grill on the Clippers. The Clippers were without Kawhi Leonard, worth mentioning, but in terms of the Heat, they were just flowing offensively. Everything looked good. And so if I'm like the Heat's coaches, I'm just playing that film on loop, being like, look how good we can be when we're firing on all cylinders.
I like it. Speaking of firing on all cylinders, Wes Goldberg, the New Jersey Brooklyn Nets of New York, sir, they are playing fantastic basketball. And one of the biggest things that it's weird, because the thing about Kevin Durant and Kyrie and this group, the best version of this team is what we saw a couple years ago, where it's like the Bucks still barely got by Kevin Durant by himself late in that series a couple years ago. And part of that is the reason that the Mavericks went to the Western Conference Finals last year. So when you see the best 2 half-court offenses in basketball are the Brooklyn Nets and the Dallas Mavericks. You're like, oh, right. That's the stuff that, like, yeah, they might have their ebbs and flows. It might be ugly in the regular season, but nobody wants to play either of those two teams come playoff time because Luka is so difficult in the half court, and it's just going to be really hard to beat him 4 times when games slow down. And it's why I've never really bought into the Memphis Grizzlies over the course of a Western Conference Finals run, where you don't see it in the half court. I don't know if they'll ever be that half court team that can run the gauntlet like this. The Heat have done obviously great stuff in that regard as well. And one of the reasons that they are so good come playoff time, both their defense and the dribble handoffs and what Jimmy is in the half court. And, that matters. I think the Nets being number one here, and when you watch how they close games and you watch when things get tight and they're healthy now, I just I think they're the favorites in the East. I think they're the favorites over the Bucks. I think they're the favorites over the Sixers, favorites over anyone right now in the Eastern Conference. And I don't think that's that hot of a take. Do you share that sentiment that with them being the best half court offense in the NBA, how do we not consider them the favorites in the East right now with everybody being healthy?
I don't know that I'm there with you in terms of sort of anointing them the favorites, although they look like they're contenders.
Mm,
And based on where we were coming into this season, that's incredible. It's remarkable that they're even contending right now. And I share everything that all the sentiments about the half court offense and how great they look. Kevin Durant is just, I'm going to use this word and I don't love it for him. He's like gliding through games, but I don't mean that in a way where he's like passive. He's just so above the rest of basketball. He just seems to be soaring above the sport right now and shooting 50+% from mid range and true shooting percentage at like 1,000,000,000%. Like, it's just unbelievable what he's able to do. He's just reached this. He's not as athletic as he once was, but he's just so smart and he's so patient and he's just so smooth with everything that he's doing. It's incredible to watch him. Kyrie Irving is playing amazing. They're getting real contributions. Like, they figured out the Ben Simmons thing. They're not trying too hard to work him into stuff. They're just sort of letting Ben Simmons be Ben Simmons. Royce O'Neal is giving him good minutes. Nick Claxton is giving him awesome minutes. They just got Seth Curry back. They're getting TJ Warren. They just got him back, and he's been really, really good for them as a bench scorer.
he's so good. Another half court guy, where
Another
just
half
the
court
bubble
guy.
TJ Warren, where it's like I want no part of this team in the playoffs.
My thing about sort of talking about them as the favorites in the East, that requires a certain amount of projecting forward that I'm still just really uncomfortable doing with this team, because anything can happen. Like, what you're really asking, can Kevin Durant sustain this for 5 more months? This is a guy with injury, a past of injuries. Like, and he's playing I think he's still playing the most minutes in the NBA. He's certainly top 5. That's a lot of wear and tear on him. Kyrie Irving, do you trust him for something not to happen in the world of Kyrie in the next 5 months? I don't. Like, it's just, he hasn't really gone that long without making some sort of distraction out of nowhere. So that's sort of where I am. And the other thing too is I'm not that worried about the Celtics. I think there's another, like, at what point do they go back to the Robert Williams, Al Horford, that's our starting group with Tatum and Brown and Marcus Smart? Do they go back to that? I think the defensive issues can get fixed in that way. Once Robert Williams sort of has his legs back under him, coming back from the surgery, that's going to just take a minute, I think. And then shooting wise, they're not going to shoot like they did the first month of the season for the entire season. They're not going to shoot like they have this last month, which has been one of the worst 5 shooting performances by a team in the league over the last month. I think they're better than that too. So I think the offense will level out. Defensively, I think they're going to get a lot better. I would still consider Boston the favorites in the East, but I'm still, like, to me, it's a pretty clear top 3 between Boston, Milwaukee, and Brooklyn. And don't sleep on the Sixers. Like, they're still they've been rolling a little bit. They've got their guys back. Tyrese Maxey just got back. They're still sort of on the fringe of that conversation.
Do you know who's the best point differential right now in the NBA?
Is it the Pelicans?
Cleveland.
Is it it's Cleveland? Yeah.
Pelicans, I think, are number 2. Yes. They're tied with they're basically tied with Brooklyn at number 2, 4.5. Yeah. Boston's number 2 at 5.2. But the last 3 games, Brooklyn plus 18.
They're unbelievable. No, Brooklyn is rolling through the league right now.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Very curious to see what happens here. And they have some expirings. They have stuff that they can do to add another big just to kind of give some cushion for Nick Claxton because of the injury stuff and just you need him
Mhm.
healthy and he's just such an important player that you want to like not have to rely on like Sharp or somebody else there at the
Yeah.
5 come playoff time. You want to have another body. Be like, hey, Rudy Gobert. We'll take Rudy Gobert off your hands. Who cares? What money isn't real here in Brooklyn. We'll just create the most highly combustible roster of all time and see what happens. But we'll get into Rudy Gobert in a second. What would you like to see them to do in the next month, though? Is there any particular trade? Is there any last thing the Nets could do that would sell you on them being a bigger threat to the East than the Celtics? Is there anything in that matchup that they could do to flip it for you?
I mean, not really. I actually really like their roster. I like their roster going into the season. I just have trust issues with this team, the way that they've
Mm,
treated me and everybody else for the last 3 years. Like, I just have well well-worn trust issues with them. So, it's not really a move. Yeah, I guess they could use size in the front court, but when they get other guy my thing is, yeah, would you like to have a bigger body to go against, like, a Joel Embiid or, Brook Lopez in that group? I guess, but I still think when the Nets are at their best, it's when they're dictating the terms of engagement and they're getting teams to adjust to them.
mm,
They're amazing in the half court, no doubt about it, but they're also really great in transition. And if they could play that up tempo type of game against Milwaukee's half court offense is in the toilet, by the way, and has been all year. I still trust the Nets to figure it out how to score against them defensively. So yeah, I don't really know that there's a move that they need to make necessarily. It's just I think it's fair to say, like, I'm not gonna trust you until you've done it. Like, I'm not gonna believe in you as a title contender until you've actually done it. And something hasn't, you haven't either created some self-inflicted wounds or injury or something like that doesn't derail your title hopes. Like, just do it. And I enjoy watching them. I'm just gonna keep doing that until.
It helps that Joe Harris is shooting 38% from three, so
Yep,
he's back.
he's been very good.
And Royce O'Neal's shooting 43% from three. He's been
Yeah,
great for them. Like, and it's the other thing too is just they're only vets. Like they're only vets and guys who have been in a lot of playoff games. And that ultimately matters. You being a Heat guy, you know how important it is to just only play vets come playoff time. But I mean, they're third in offense, eighth in defense. But the offense, like they are doing the Spurs thing where they're 28th in three pointers taken, and then number 2 in the league. So it's like the ones they do take, they're hitting, and
right.
everything else is just Kevin Durant and Kyrie killing you in the mid range or at the rim. And then they haven't got to the line. They're 28th in free throw attempts. Like they haven't. Kevin Durant and Kyrie and company aren't even drawing a bunch of fouls, and you're like, they're still the number 3 offense. I don't know. I just
It's
think
not a shot. It's not really the profile of a great offense. The
right.
only thing is that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are that good as
Yeah.
isolation scorers, especially in the mid range. They're number one mid range team in the league by percentage by a lot, by a mile. And most of the time that stuff isn't sustainable.
Right.
But I have no reason to think that for this team it's not, because it's Kevin Durant and it's been sustainable for whatever 15, 16 years for him. And for Kyrie Irving, as long as he's on the court, most of the time, this is what you're going to get. Now, Kyrie Irving has had some playoff issues in the past, but if he could be like this in the playoffs, yeah, no team wants to play them.
Teams that everybody wants to play is the Minnesota Timberwolves right now. Wes, this is like when I like some things I'll hit. Like I had the Raptors winning the finals a couple years ago before the finals run. This is a miss for me, Wes. This like
Same,
the
me
Wolves are
too.
one of the biggest misses for me going into the NBA season. I think of my adult life. I had them being the number 1 seed in the Western Conference coming in this year, where I was like, they're going to play 6 or 7 guys. They traded all their depth. It should be healthy. Anthony Edwards, I think, could be the best player in basketball in the next 2 to 3 years. Rudy Gobert is going to gobble up a lot of rebounds. They're going to have a top 5 defense. Towns and him will have a weird fit, but you can stagger them. They should do like there's just enough talent there that they
Yeah.
should be able to just gobble up a bunch of regular season wins. I don't trust them come playoff time, but they should eat up the regular season. They are not
I
eating
said
up.
the same thing. I said this is going to
Okay.
be top 10 offense, top 10 defense, 50
Right?
plus wins, mark it down. I think the Vegas over under was at 48 and a half,
I
49
think
and
they're
a
going to
half,
get it.
something like that. Um, I was with you. I was all in on
Mm.
Minnesota as a regular season team. I picked them in every single preview that we did, everything like that. I was very wrong. They're what 14th in offensive rating
17 and 21 total. They're 15th in defense, 20th in offense right now.
20th in offense. Yeah.
23rd in net rating in the league.
Not great. Not great. Look, I the Rudy Gobert trade is an absolute disaster. That much has been proven at this point. I don't really know how you come back from this. And now there's sort of some scuttle about maybe they trade Karl Anthony Towns to sort of reset things and recoup some of the draft picks like that you trade for Gobert. So basically what you're telling me is you're going to trade Karl Anthony Towns for Rudy Gobert. That's not a great deal. Considering how Rudy Gobert, how poorly he looks lately. The other part of it too is like I thought they would. I kind of feel like we fetishize fit a little bit too much in NBA conversation. Just sometimes talent ends up taking over, at least in the regular season, in terms of just piling up wins and stuff like that. Like fit and chemistry, that's first world problems in the NBA. Sometimes you just need to get talent and then accumulate some wins and then figure out that stuff later on in terms of fit and chemistry and on the court stuff like that. But this is there's just these are four guys that don't want to play together. It doesn't seem like they have no interest in learning how to play together. And look, it's D'Angelo Russell, who's been with a lot of different teams, and I covered him when he was in Golden State, and he didn't really have all that much interest in fitting in Golden State. He was just going to do D'Angelo Russell things, and he did, and then he got traded at the deadline. So this is a guy with a track record of not really wanting to fit in, for better or for worse. Anthony Edwards is still really young. To ask him to not only take that leap that you want him to take, but also fit in with like three other quote unquote stars, that's just a lot to put on Anthony Edwards at his age, at this point in his developmental curve in his career. Rudy Gobert is just what he is. There's no versatility in his game. If you let him do what he can do, he's very good at it. But if you don't let him do that stuff, he just doesn't really bring much to the table. And then Karl Anthony Towns, how many star teammates has this guy been through that have just either been fed up with him or it didn't work for one reason or the other? He's just not really a guy who meshes with other guys. And you're like, well, you're a pick and pop big. You're one of the most versatile offensive bigs we've ever had in the game. Why wouldn't it work? And just for some reason, it just doesn't with him. So yeah, you just sort of go down the list and you're like, yeah, I can. You don't really have that one fixture, that one guy, the culture setter, the guy that just makes everybody connect. If you just had that one guy to make everybody connect, maybe there's a way to salvage this thing. But the Timberwolves just look like a completely disconnected team and a poorly constructed one. And this Rudy Gobert trade, again, is just a complete miss.
And you can't do anything with Gobert. He's part of this long-term like build. It's him and Edwards are just untouchable for very different reasons. Those two are untouchable. So I think to kind of get out of this, Towns has to be the fall guy. And it's a tough spot to be in, but if I am A-Rod, and many times I wonder, what would I do if I was Alex Rodriguez?
Who doesn't think about that?
All right, who doesn't? Or Mark Lore, is it the other co-owner? I think it's Mark Lore. Lore. But either way, I'm coming into this situation now being like, all right, we are moving on from Chris Finch. We are bringing in Quinn Snyder, and we are recreating the Jazz from the Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert era. And we're just doing that all over again with Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert. Didn't win a title in Utah. It won a bunch of games. It might not be the most exciting fit, but like that's what you have to do. Like you have to just scrap everything, just run it back and recreate a Jazz team that just created the perfect pick and roll offense. Yeah. Like people forget, like it was the drop coverage and what Rudy Gobert was doing with Donovan Mitchell. It worked really well. This is a team that won a bunch of regular season games, but you can't do that with Karl Anthony Towns, and you can't do that with D'Angelo Russell being your lead guard. So those guys have to go, and then you just recreate Jazz Mania. Who doesn't want that in Minnesota?
It's a depressing thought, man, if you're a Timberwolves fan. These are rough times.
But it's not that rough because you still have a 21-year-old Anthony Edwards. Like that's my thing when you come back to it. It's just like with the Hawks, me dealing with just everything here. Like we're at the end of look, I'm pretty down on where things are headed. Like I think we're less than a year out from Trae Young asking for a trade from Atlanta. Yeah. But I don't think they're there yet with Minnesota. And you have somebody who can be the best player in basketball, like the guy that everyone wants, which is a wing who can do everything: shoot, dunk, defend, everything. Size. Like those are the guys that are just, they never pop in the draft. They're never around. And if you develop them the right way, then you might have a Michael Jordan on your hands. Like that's, and I don't want to throw he's the next Michael Jordan, but it's like
it's a glass half full take,
yes,
right? And look, Karl Anthony Towns is a guy who's not stepped up in the playoffs, right? I mean, he can put up numbers, but he makes really bad mistakes almost every series. If you trade him and you can get a bunch of stuff back, okay, now you're starting to recoup some of the draft assets that you lost. You simplify things for a young Anthony Edwards. Hey, man, it's pick and roll. When they go under, do your thing. When they go over, hit Rudy Gobert on the lob. That's your job for now on offense. Just go ahead and do that. D'Angelo Russell, just trade him. Like, I don't know what you can get between the
he's
deadline.
packaged with Karl Anthony Towns. They're tight anyway. Just they're a package deal.
Yeah, trade him. Like, hey, where do you guys want to play? What's a franchise that doesn't matter right now? You guys just go there.
I don't even know where the best fit is. Like, where is that fit?
Yeah, it was Minnesota, and then they drafted Anthony Edwards, and they're like, oh, now we have a player that actually matters now. What's a team that doesn't like the Spurs don't really matter, but they've got some nice young players.
They're leading the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes right now.
That's true. Whoever doesn't get Wembanyama maybe trades like the 5th pick in the draft for Karl Anthony Towns or something. I don't know.
It's got to be a weird team that wants to build through the middle. It has to be like the Wizards or Portland or the Kings already did with Sabonis.
Did you do it? Could you send him to the Lakers?
No, I don't. Who are you sending back if you're the Lakers?
Westbrook.
No, that's not enough. That's not enough. You'd have to send
the 2 unprotected picks.
No,
I mean, D'Angelo Russell is not an asset right now. Like that's a throw in. So basically, you'd be trading 2 unprotected picks for Karl Anthony Towns, and that doesn't feel like enough for Cat. So
yeah, I don't. You look around the league, and I'm just like, I don't know who it is. Maybe you call Detroit for
interesting
Killian Hayes and Bojan
Bogdanovic.
I'm telling you, I'm recreating the Jazz.
You are. Just do it. Like, where's Joe Ingles now? He's on Milwaukee. Okay, let's call the Bucks. We'll give you put Karl Anthony Towns on the Bucks. That'd be interesting. How about that for a reset the timeline type deal for the Bucks? You know, Brook Lopez, he's what, 34 years old. You could trade Brook Lopez on an expiring contract, give him Joe Ingles because they want him. And then Towns. They don't have any first round picks though with the Bucks because they traded them all for Drew Holiday. So that doesn't make any sense either.
The ultimate just
Magic.
They have. I mean, I don't think he fits.
We like
the
Magic. Yeah,
he won't defend like what they're looking for, and I think that's already a pretty crowded front court. Maybe the Dallas would have been awesome, but I don't think they can do that. Like Dallas, him and Luka would be a lot of fun in the half court and closing games. I don't know if Luka and him would vibe all that well, but
what if you did like Chicago, Cat and D'Lo to Chicago for like Vucevic?
We're trying to make Chicago less depressing.
Yeah, that's true.
We're trying to make them less depressing.
Oh, the Wizards. The Wizards are the most ridiculous franchise. Could you get Bradley Beal?
I don't think they're doing that for Bradley Beal. I think you can get more for Bradley Beal.
Probably could, but like Beal and a bunch of picks.
Yeah. Now you're doing Beal for like Edwards. Like you're not doing.
Oh, really? The Wizards need to trade Beal. Whatever. The Wizards. The answer to the original question was, what's the team that matters the least in the NBA? And right now it is the Washington Wizards. So
yeah, go Wizards. Wes, what can the good folks check out from you over on Locked On Heat this week?
Well, we've got recaps of the West Coast games right now that are starting at 10 and 10:30 if you're on the East Coast. So if you don't want to stay up and watch the games, you could just wake up early in the morning and listen to the recaps of the games, which, take it from me, way more efficient use of your time than watching those West Coast games and staying up until like 2:30 in the morning with that. But
been there, bro. After the Warriors double overtime win over the Hawks the other night. Yeah, that was a great one to stay up for.
Yeah.
It's fun time.
Kevon Looney Tippin. Friday mornings, Locked On NBA. And then I've got a new column over at the Step Back every week that's NBA related. So check that out, please. And then I just wrote a piece for the Ringer on the Miami Heat that is still relevant, talking about kind of the stuff that we were discussing about the Heat earlier in the show. There you go. Wes Goldberg. Love to see it. Love to see it. Thank you as always for the time. Go listen to Locked On Heat. Subscribe. All the good stuff if you have not already done so. Wes does great work and read his work as well. Wes, always a pleasure. Talk to you soon. Good time.